Welcome back to On the Mind. I'm Austin,
I'm Duncan.
I'm Bryce.
and this week we're going to have a medium-sized discussion over Trump's inaugural weekend, and we're going to start with his inaugural address. So, Duncan, you mind telling me about it?
Yeah. So basically, the inaugural address was sort of a combination of expected and unexpected. If you expected him to strike a conciliatory and unifying tone with his inaugural address, which is something many presidents seek to do, especially after an election during which there isn't an incumbent president, so the election tends to be a little bit fiercer in terms of the debates, in terms of the competition. That was definitely not the approach that Donald Trump took. If, on the other hand, you expected him to use his speech to energize his populist base, to sort of reaffirm some campaign promises, and yet at the same time say almost absolutely nothing substantive with regards to policy, then you called Donald Trump's speech on the nose almost perfectly. One thing to note, it was very grim in many ways. He presented a vision of America that was almost post-apocalyptic in some manners.
If I remember right, you know what? You were really happy about this quote. Tell me how he described the Rust Belt.
So at one point during his speech, and this was sort of in the most intense segment of it, I would say, and one thing I will say, just because I like to play devil's advocate, the speech was fairly well written. I'll give him this. It was well written. It was well delivered.
Wasn't it Steve Bannon that wrote it?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
And, to his credit, decent writer. But at one point, he did describe the closure of especially older factories across the Rust Belt by saying that rusted-out factories were scattered like tombstones across the land. I could not tell if I was listening to an address by a president of the United States or if I was listening to a T.S. Eliot poem read by Donald Trump.
Yep. Anything, Bryce?
Yeah, Donald Trump, for the first half of his speech, talked about how the government is in the American citizens' hands, how they are employees by us, we're the bosses, so forth. So I wanted to give some stats, some real facts here. So the majority of Americans want free or affordable health care. Not something that Trump or his team seem to advocate.
They might not advocate for it, but they've mentioned how they'd like to do it. He said
Or at
something
least he
about
himself
universal
had.
health
Maybe not
care.
his
Yeah,
team,
not
but
his
he
team,
himself.
Yeah, his team definitely against him. He said, well, why not?
Repealing Obamacare without a replacement. That's Donald Trump says a lot of things and does the exact opposite. So I'm not going to give him the benefit of the doubt on this one. Another one, according to the Huffington Post, 6% more of Americans are pro-choice. So far, based on what he's done in his presidency, he's moved more towards the pro-lifers with his policies.
Right, wasn't it the Mexico City?
The Mexico City policy,
policy.
which I think we're going to get to a little later when we hit the executive order.
That's right.
According to a Monmouth University study, 70% of Americans believe in climate change. All mention of climate change was taken off the government's webpage.
Only hours afterwards, too.
Yeah, very quick. Also, by the way, so was any mention of the LGBT community. According to Center of Immigration Studies, 61% of Americans oppose the border wall with Mexico.
Well, even if you don't oppose it morally, you do economically.
Yep. So I have one more for you, but let me just say, obviously, he is a big phony when it comes to letting Americans run things, at least by popular opinion, staggering amount. Here's another fun fact for you. Donald Trump has an approval rating of around 40%. Some studies will say a little bit more. Most of what I saw said 40%. Paul Blart Mall Cop has an audience rating of 43%, according to Rotten Tomatoes. So Paul Blart Mall Cop, more popular than Donald Trump.
All right. When you said Donald Trump, you're a phony, it was just that Family Guy episode. You're a big fat phony. That came into my mind. Oh. I think it applies.
He is a big fat phony.
No,
he is in the overweight category.
One thing that
big overweight phony.
One thing that bears talking about with his inaugural address specifically, as I said, it was very devoid of actual policy substance. Mm-hmm. However, there was one thing he said that actually pointed somewhat toward his policies, and unfortunately, I have to say this is what I disagreed with him most on. At one point in his inaugural address, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he actually said protection, and the word protection was in there. It was not protectionism, but it was implied. Right. Protection would make us wealthy or make us rich or something to that effect. And obviously he was talking about his trade policy, which was a huge part of his campaigning platform. I think many people, myself included, were hoping that maybe once in the office with the sheer gravitas of the presidency, he might reconsider his fundamentally flawed trade policies. And he has given every indication of deciding that he is not going to go that route.
Well, he's made it abundantly clear that he doesn't think his policies are bad. He thinks that the trade policies in place are bad.
He is wrong.
You know what? I will let you try having that discussion with his team because they are almost certain.
I would love to.
I
would love it.
I know you would, Duncan. I know. We'll petition for it, but I don't think it's going to be allowed just because...
Can I warm up on Kellyanne Conway? She seems like an easy mark.
She's so kind, though, and so generous.
And so
How could
generous.
You be so
and gracious.
evil?
Gracious.
We'll get to her later, I
yeah,
promise.
I'm sorry.
No, I know. And I can't even make jokes about what I want to make jokes about yet.
Right. But no, it was worth noting that was the one piece of actual policy that he talked about. And again, that very much reaffirmed that he's going to be, or at least paint himself as much of a populist in office as he was on the campaign trail.
Right. And we'll see how that translates, even though we've got so much to talk about it already.
Yeah.
Let's talk about his ego.
It's too big to talk about.
Yeah, it's the biggest. Anyway, just like his inaugural crowd, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or so he claims.
Right. Estimates have it at around 800,000, and
maybe a little less, depending on the
We'll give
estimate.
him the benefit of the doubt, even though we really shouldn't. It was somewhere in the ballpark of 600,000 to 800,000, and that's a pretty decent crowd, I'd say.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Although he doesn't think so.
No, he said it had to be somewhere in the ballpark of 1 to 1.5 million.
Yeah.
And
this
just deceive people, right?
And the funny thing is, this has gotten really famous over the weekend, and we're about to get into that. This started on Inauguration Day. I know I was the only one who was kind of watching the post-inauguration coverage on live TV, but the presidential parade down Pennsylvania Avenue, during which he's driven to the White House for the first time. Very traditional moment. After the banquet that's in Statutory Hall in the Capitol building. Even at that point, Donald Trump was releasing information that he thought that the crowds were thinned along Pennsylvania Avenue for his presidential parade because the luncheon ran late and people got tired of waiting for him, basically.
Really?
So he was making up excuses. I kid you not, an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours after the inauguration had already taken place as to why the crowds were so small for his drive to the White House for the first time.
The other argument that a lot of people are stating on social media is that everybody was working. And I saw one, I think it was John Legend, I believe. He said, yeah, there are a lot of new jobs thanks to Obama.
Oh, wow.
But
the shade.
Yeah, still, though, that's definitely not the reason why.
Speaking of shade, the gloom and doom forecast is another thing he placed the blame on. It did rain, though, for a little bit.
Well, it kind of matched his speech.
Right.
I think it matched what we're all feeling.
You know what? Actually,
it's
if his trade policies continue as he says they will, by the time he's done with America, it actually might be as economically bereft as he thinks it is right now.
It'll
That's
be
ironic.
the next president's fault.
Yes. But the next president can run against him, and it might be legit.
That's true. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to our new, probably going to be frequently mentioned press secretary, Sean Spicer, who had to come to Trump's aid, although I think he was ordered to come out and say this, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
He came out and said this was the largest inaugural crowd in attendance ever, period.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody was quick to point out that he was wrong.
Yes.
And that wasn't the only... I can't even say what I want to say.
Let's wait for
Say it,
what's
Austin.
coming up.
Say
Let's say falsehood, because
Yes.
that's what's been...
Yes.
Say what
That's
you want.
an alternate word. How about that?
We're coming
falsehood.
to it. We're coming to it, folks.
And it's not... It just floors me how many inaccurate statements he said knowingly. If he would have said it was the largest crowd to ever watch not even crowd. It was the largest
Audience?
that an inauguration has ever
Largest
had.
total viewership would
There
have
we
been the
go,
best
that's
way
awesome.
to put it.
It was the largest TV viewership for sure, and total also, but it wasn't the largest crowd in attendance ever. Obama had that by far.
Now, I will say that Sean Spicer's been catching a lot of flack for this, and as angry as I actually am that a presidential administration has even bothered to be so petty as to, sink to this, discussing the size of the inaugural crowd, come on. But let's recognize that Sean Spicer's job is literally to go out in front of the press corps and to present the information he is given by the administration. This is not really his fault. He was simply doing what he was told. The person we're about to talk about next, on the other hand, maybe not so much.
I want to go out of my way to point out that Sean Spicer has had a Twitter war going on with Dippin' Dots for 5 years, so I think he would sink to that level on his own.
I'm not saying he wouldn't, but I'm saying it was his job to do so in this case.
There's a certain level of integrity as well that should be taken into account. If my employers told me to blatantly lie to customers for their own gain, I would not do that. I mean, that would be fraudulent.
That's on him. It really is.
Yeah.
I understand it's his job, and it's not a desirable one to speak to Donald Trump.
I don't envy him his job. I wouldn't have taken it if I were him.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. But, however, he has less choice than our favorite Kellyanne Conway, who I have avoided up until now. I honestly have never heard her talk before, and watching that interview was just...
Up until now, it's been very hard to get a sense of her as a figure. I mean, she says things very intermittently, but it's been hard to get a general sense of her. I think now we've got that.
Mm-hmm.
I saw something on Facebook. Why aren't liberals praising Kellyanne Conway for being the first female to ever successfully run a presidential campaign? And I had said in the comments section, yeah, she's the first woman to successfully run a presidential campaign, but in the process, she shut down who would have been the first female president of the United States. So, I mean, not as impressive. It's more harm.
I understand where you're coming from, but let's just talk about how great a person she is, because she does mention that.
Yeah.
First of all, she was talking to Chuck Todd on. I saw it on Sunday morning.
It was
Meet
the Press. It was the Meet the Press.
Okay.
Television show.
So Chuck Todd, and I will give Chuck Todd credit for this. He went after her. He was not having any crap from her as she tried to defend Sean Spicer and Donald Trump's ego. She was trying very hard to dodge his questions. At least I'm sure it was in her mind very hard.
She needed some lessons from Hillary Clinton, I think.
Right, she had the finesse of Donald Trump when she needed the finesse of Hillary Clinton. I just plain and simple couldn't get away from the question. And I will give Chuck Todd, if you can, praise him on whatever you want. The guy went after her pretty hard and wouldn't take a dodge for an answer. And eventually she said, one of my favorite words of 2017... phrases, I should say, actually. She said, he asked her, why did Sean Spicer, go out and deliberately lie about the size of the crowd? And her response was, oh, he didn't lie, he just gave an alternate fact.
Followed by his assertion, well, an alternate fact is in fact a falsehood.
And she tried to defend that.
Yeah. Now she even... this is not even the most ridiculous part of this whole exchange between them. Immediately, when he asked why she was not answering the question after that, she pivoted to, kind of the campaign talking points, people who can't afford health insurance or people who can't get industrial manufacturing jobs and that sort of thing. It sounded more like an outline for a Trump campaign speech, but be that as it may, he kept, and I'll give him credit for this, he kept coming back to the issue of, no, this was a press secretary's meeting for the press corps about this one particular issue. And she kept trying to, divert and say, well, this is what the whole presidency is about. And I'm sorry, that's not how this works. If a press secretary gives a press conference, it is about either one or a set of specific agenda points that are discussed, and that is what that press secretary's meeting is about.
It's not how this works. It's not how any of this works.
And then at one point she actually said that crowds were not quantifiable. If you cannot assign a number to a number. That I mean, literally, how else? I mean, how would you? I mean, I'm going
can't quantify numbers, Duncan.
I'm seriously asking this. How else would you describe a crowd? I mean, do we want to know how these people were feel if they were in the spirit of the event? Do they count as 3?
Duncan, I want to tell you, the one way to describe that crowd: huge, massive.
I believe you mean huge, Austin.
Whoa. I think that's a little too much. Even the Donald would have to use an H there.
That crowd was bigly.
But, I mean, seriously, she actually said you can't quantify a crowd. And I think she was trying to say that, you can't exactly count a crowd of that size without a lot of resources to do it. But if that's the idea she was trying to express, she did it incredibly poorly.
Not only that, but they could at least put it in the guess.
Sure,
They
an
did.
estimate.
The estimate
They
in the
absolutely
same
did do that.
They did
vein
that.
of Obama's.
Sure.
They could have used it.
I mean, granted, they didn't have a census man going throughout the crowd and counting each and every one of them by putting a little yellow sticky note on them. That would have been ridiculous. But, I mean, if that's the idea she was trying to express, then she just did it horrifically badly. Or horrifically bigly.
There you go. I was waiting for that change. All right. So those are the main talking points about that. Is there anything else you want to bring up with this inaugural?
There is one more thing related to, and again, I realize I'm being a lot more biased than I usually am tonight, so I apologize to the viewers who like me for objectivity. All 2 of you. But anyway, not too long after all of this was kind of going down, Donald Trump decided he was going to censor the entirety of the Department of the Interior's Twitter usage. This means every page of every Department of the Interior bureau and every sub-department of that particular department, because the National Park Service, the service that administers, national monuments and parks and such, retweeted the image that's been going around on social media. It's fairly famous, and admittedly, this is skewed. It shows on the left side Obama's inauguration at its full capacity, and on the right side, an early image of Trump's inauguration that I think was taken probably around 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning prior to the inauguration. They retweeted it, and not too long afterwards, a memo came down that not only did the National Park Service have to stop their Twitter usage, they had to do all of their communications on Facebook with the public now. The entire Department of the Interior, of which the National Park Service is, of course, a bureau, was required to cease its Twitter usage.
Well, that's pretty crazy, actually.
Basically, because they offended the presidency, he was triggered.
Yeah,
Does he need to go to his safe space?
We'll get
He's
into
trying
that
to
later.
turn the whole country into his safe space.
Out of people that criticize safe spaces the most, they elected the one that needed it the most.
I didn't vote for him. I criticize safe spaces a lot, and I didn't vote for him.
But I will point out that there were a couple of funny troll moments. The Dallas Stars, an NHL team, they have an arena capacity of 20,000. And they said they had a record-breaking audience on their billboard, and they said 1.5 million people showed up.
Oh, that's good. That is.
And Merriam-Webster on Twitter decided to define fact
So I actually,
something that's objectively
I
true.
actually have a prediction, and I'm going to say this in January. I think when 2017's Merriam-Webster Dictionary Word of the Year is selected, it's going to be alternative facts. I think it's going to be alternative fact.
Yeah. Well, I hope not. In any case, got more topics to talk about.
We do.
And I think this one is a good closing point. So, that being said, thanks for listening. That's what's on the mind.